Good morning. On behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the Interconnection Process Enhancements 5.0 stakeholder meeting to discuss the straw proposal, which was posted on August 4th. Apologies for not having my camera on. I'm having some unstable network issues this morning, so I'm just going to be here over audio. My name is Elena Kopolov-Alford, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'll be facilitating the web conference today. I'm joined by Jeff Billington, Director in Transmission Infrastructure Planning, Danielle Mills, Principal in Infrastructure Policy Development, Bob Emmert, Senior Manager in Interconnection Resources. We've got Linda Wright presenting as a lead interconnection specialist. We're also going to have Ryan Cox, Queue Management Specialist, and Eric East as a senior contract negotiator, who will also be presenting later today. Next slide, please. These materials can be found on the Interconnection Process Enhancements Initiative page. You can get to that page by going to CAISO.com, navigating to the Stakeholder Center tab at the top, selecting Policy Initiatives, and that'll take you to our main initiatives landing page. From there, you can navigate to the IPE 5.0 page, and the latest documents will be at the top of that page. So some housekeeping reminders: this call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. The meeting is collaborative and intended to stimulate open dialogue and engage different perspectives. Please keep your comments professional and respectful as always. And please try to be brief and refrain from repeating what's already been said so we can manage our time efficiently today. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is a newer version of WebEx that we have moved to, and there's a few changes from the WebEx Classic that we were using. So now the raise hand icon is back at the bottom of the screen. Probably if you're used to using WebEx, this is the normal spot, and you no longer have to open up the other panels. However, there's now a Inteller transparency view that you can open and refresh, and you can see other attendees that are joined on the line as well. And there's now a closed captioning button at the very bottom left to have closed captioning on. And just a reminder, please state your name or affiliation before making your comment or asking your question. And if you'd like to add a question into the chat, you can send that to all panelists. If you need technical assistance during the meeting, you can send a chat to the event producer at Inteller Events. Today's event producer is Tegan. Next slide. Okay, here is our agenda for today. We are going to be going through the straw proposal item by item, and we've got Danielle, Bob, Eric, Linda, and Ryan presenting. We're going to be taking questions throughout, but it's going to be pretty packed today. Let's go to the next slide. So just to give you an idea of where we are in the initiative stakeholder process here. So this is the first meeting for Interconnection Process Enhancements 5.0. We just posted the straw proposal last week, and we are here discussing this before taking comments and moving on to the next proposal here. Next slide. And here I'm going to hand it over to Danielle Mills to give some background on the start of this initiative.
Thanks, Elena. Good morning, everyone. Back here again for a new Interconnection Process Enhancements Initiative. I want to maybe start by just acknowledging the change in the naming convention of Interconnection Process Enhancement Initiatives. We've moved to IPE 5.0 since this is now the 5th IPE initiative that the ISO has conducted. And so hopefully this won't span 2 years again, but if it does, we're ready with the naming convention. We wanted to kind of focus this initiative on revisiting some of the commitments that we made in the 2023 IPE initiative, and really hearing from stakeholders and looking at the data and the status of the queue to evaluate whether there are additional changes that are necessary. So those will focus on kind of 4 key areas that follows the straw proposal. The first is elements of track 2 in IPE 2023, where we committed to monitoring and revisiting certain parts of the interconnection request intake process. We also looked at certain policy items that were raised but not finalized in the 2023 IPE Track 3 initiative, And so we'll look at those and discuss those as well today, and hope to receive your comments on those items. And then we received a few additional suggestions from stakeholders that we just wanted to address in the paper, and came up with a few issues on our own internally at the ISO as we implemented the Cluster 15 process and the most recent reforms. Just found a couple areas that could kind of streamline the process and make it flow a little bit better for the ISO and for interconnection customers. So that's kind of the outline of the straw proposal. I think as we move forward with future papers, it may, the sections of the paper may take a different shape, or we may outline it more sequentially through the process or something like that. But for now, wanted to make sure that we just had the full set of issues that stakeholders had asked us to take a look at, and that we were giving time for fulsome discussion of all of those issues. We did also post a summary of the Cluster 15 scoring process on June 12th, and that definitely informed where we are on our straw proposal and why we made some proposals and expressed more openness to some proposals than others. I think, we want you all to draw your own conclusions from that scoring data, and so we wanted to just post as much transparent data as we possibly could on the scoring process. But we also felt that it substantiated really minimal changes to our intake process, so that we can move forward with this process and hopefully start to see some positive trends emerge over the next few cluster cycles every year. We also submitted a report to FERC on the composition of Cluster 15. That was due August 1st, but we submitted it on July 30th. That was a compliance requirement from FERC, or a requirement from FERC when they approved our order. And then we posted an ICE 5.0 scoping document in July and received stakeholder comments on that, and some of the issues that were raised there, if they didn't fall neatly into one of the categories listed above, we addressed separately in the paper as well. And so I think maybe just at a high level, I want to express to how much gratitude we have for all of the stakeholders who have participated in this process, as well as ISO staff. Interconnections team has had a really difficult year just implementing all of these changes and the changes from Order 2023 on top of that. It's been a lot of changes for everyone. I know it was a lot of changes within the industry too, both interconnection customers and load serving entities having new major roles and obligations as a part of this process. So, we're all trying to get through this together. We do want to have some stability in our interconnection process going forward, and we want to provide certainty to everyone in the market who's participating in the interconnection process. And so to do that, our inclination is to really focus on minimal and necessary changes to this process as we watch it bear out over the next few cycles. But with that said, I think there are certainly some things that can use some tweaking and some modest adjustments. There are many areas in the paper where you will note that we didn't make a formal proposal ourselves, but expressed openness to hearing more proposals. And really, if we receive proposals from stakeholders on this, we really feel like we just need to have a good sense of and a common shared sense of the problem statement that leads to some of these proposals. So if there was a section that you were really hoping to see that we would make some changes to, I think we just need to hear a little bit more about what those changes would accomplish and what problem they would solve. So hopefully you all took a look at the paper and understand where we're coming from, but that we are still open to making some changes. With that said, we are in the straw proposal phase, and we're hoping to complete this initiative by March of next year. So any proposals and new problem statements really need to come in this round of the initiative if we're going to be able to move them through a draft final proposal and a final proposal. So we're hoping we can have a good, rich discussion of all of those issues during the workshop today. And if we need to schedule additional follow-up conversations in the next week or two to kind of dig into some of these issues, we'll flag those. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
Danielle, we have one hand and we have one question in the queue. Let's go to the hand from Susan Schneider.
Felting, can you hear me, Danielle?
Yes. Hi, Susan.
Okay. Hi. So you touched on this a little bit, but I just wanted to be clear. So there are some of the topics where you have actual, with a few topics where the CAISO has actual proposals. Obviously, those are in scope. There's other topics where the CAISO has no proposals and clearly said that they're not making proposals at this time, but invited other stakeholders to make proposals either specifically or in general, maybe with some caveats like make sure you identify the problem. And then there were also a few topics where the CAISO said, well, we're not making any proposals this time, and there wasn't any sort of invitation or other statement. Are those in that last, obviously the first two categories, those are in scope for this initiative. The ones where you didn't, you basically said, we're not making a proposal this time and didn't really say anything else, like inviting other people to do anything. Are those are still in scope at this point for the proposal? Is that right?
Oh, Danielle, you're on mute.
Thank you, Elena. Yeah, good question, Susan. I know there are kind of three shades of gray in there.
Yeah, that's why I was asking, just for clarification.
Yeah, I understand. So for those items that don't really express as much openness to us making a proposal or taking feedback on an issue, I think if we don't receive, really eye-opening comments that identify some problem that we weren't aware of, we will probably drop those items in the next proposal. There are certain things that we just don't feel we have time or the need to develop further proposals on in this initiative.
Okay, so just because something's in the straw proposal doesn't mean it's necessarily going to stay in scope as you go forward.
Right. Yeah, I think what we would do if we're formally kind of withdrawing an item from the next paper is we would just include a section that says, these items we're not exploring anymore.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that clarification. So people are welcome to comment this time.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, I think for all of them too, we really need a sense of what is the problem. If we've missed a problem, then we need to be made aware of it. And is this a problem for, is this a policy-wide problem and something that needs attention, or is it something that's just can be solved in some other way?
Okay. All right. I appreciate the clarification. Thanks, Danielle.
Thanks, Susan. We do have one kind of a general question in the chat from Jerry Melcher. When will Cluster 15 projects be merged into the general interconnection public queue?
I will see if Bob wants to answer that question.
Bob, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
That's something I'm going to have to take back. I don't have a specific answer to that of when, because basically what we need to do is get all of the pre-cluster 15 projects into GRIP to where we can have one report come out of the single application. And I don't have a date for that. I don't know if Kaylee does or not, but anyway, we can get back to you on that.
Hi, it's Kaylee. Our plan to integrate all the pre-cluster 15 data into GRIP is going to be, I would guess, Q3 of next year. So I would not expect the integrator report before then.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's dive in. So we've got Section 2 ISO comments to monitor and revisit elements of interconnection request intake process from IPE 2023 Track 2. Let's go to the next slide. And Danielle, is this yours?
Yes, it is. Okay, so as many of you probably recall, this was a really big issue in Track 2 and in the final proposal, and obviously a new part of the process for everyone involved in Cluster 15. We did hear a lot of back and forth and a lot of feedback from interconnection customers, and we spoke to a lot of LSEs during the cluster application window in Cluster 15. And we did hear some concerns from interconnection customers around fees, and I know some of this is also still subject to review. but we are not proposing at this point any changes to the commercial interest point allocation process in the scoring intake process. And, I think really want to respect our role in this part of the process and enable the local regulatory authorities to make decisions about the appropriateness of certain procurement behaviors and how this process fits into those behaviors. We have been in close coordination with the Public Utilities Commission on this item, which we've discussed this with them, and we're awaiting, comments from them in this initiative as well to see if they are proposing any modifications to this process. But at this point, we haven't seen anything that seems, that seems to be out of line or inequitable or have any issues. So we do feel that the transparency, rigor, and integrity of the process is intact, and welcome feedback from stakeholders as well as the LRAs on this issue.
Okay, we have a hand from Tony Zimmer.
And confirm that as far as NCPA is concerned, speaking on behalf of its members and local regulatory authorities, we feel that the current process that's in place is today that's sufficient, and we don't think that any changes are required at this time. So I echo at least my understanding of ISO's current position on this, and just want to provide that feedback. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Okay, there's no other hands in queue, Daniel.
Okay, thanks, Elena. Okay, next item is the process where non-LSE entities, so this is commercial and industrial customers or financial institutions, can participate in the LSE application process, or rather can participate in the scoring process for commercial interest points. As you may recall, in track 2, we gave non-LSEs an opportunity to provide points to projects, and it would either be 25 points or 0 points. So it was binary, and it was every non-LSE could only provide points to one project. And we were very intentional about making the point value less than the LSE point value because non-LSEs do not have an RA obligation. We have engaged with a few non-LSEs and received some feedback from them. As I mentioned, there was feedback just about the affidavit requiring clarification that the project would be for sustainability goals, corporate sustainability goals. There was a suggestion that we might strike that. But at this point, we didn't see any significant barriers to entry or barriers to participation from non-LSE projects. In fact, I believe every project that received non-LSE points advanced to the scoring process. So it did not seem like an issue where there was any sort of disadvantage by non-LSEs. So for that reason, we are not proposing modifications. We would like to hear more from some non-LSEs on this. We've only spoken with a few. I think particularly in light of some of the demand growth that we're starting to see and interest in data centers and things like that, we do want to make sure that this is a durable policy. So we are open to feedback and potential changes, but really need to hear that from the non-LSEs and really need to hear and understand what the problem statement is.
Okay, let's go to the hand from Susan.
Yeah, hi, Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. I'm just wondering. I know from speaking for LSA, we've made some suggestions that that non-LSEs be allowed to express interest in more than one project. For example, if they could demonstrate that they had very, very large loads or loads that were spread across the service area, where you know, if they were interested, for example, in having generation locate near their facility for reliability purposes, as some LSEs also prefer. They would have the ability to do that. And so we're just wondering, there wasn't any real response to that suggestion in the paper. We're just wondering if you had considered that, and why you chose not to include those kind of features.
Yeah, we did consider it. And I think, again, this really comes down to needing to hear from the entities themselves of what they need. It's, you know, I think it's one thing to say we should raise the points value or we should allow them to get to more than one project, but we also think that in looking at the data, there's a good chance that we have already struck the right balance. And that by making this, by, you know, loosening some of those restrictions, you know, we could see more kind of more PPAs that are maybe not as sound as others, or more arrangements that are not as sound as others. And we do want to make sure that we're upholding kind of the integrity of this process. So if we hear from non-LSEs that they feel constrained and that the projects that the one project limit is not sufficient, and why, then we might be willing to look at that. But it's really just the engagement from the non-LSE entities themselves that we need to hear.
Did you have any reason in looking at whatever PPAs, you know, or what reason did you have for concern about whether those PPAs were legitimate or just as good as LSE PPAs?
Well, I can let others chime in on this as well, but I know that it is sometimes time consuming to go through these individual PPAs and to make sure that everything is, you know, is properly documented and that these are real PPAs, especially when there's not kind of a standard contract that everyone's reviewing. So some of it is just sensitivity to the integrity of the procurement process, and also just time, the time that it takes to do some of this verification. And that bleeds into, you know, also wanting to respect the ISO's role, that we don't really want to be in a position of having to go much farther in sussing out real versus non-real, or viable versus unviable PPAs.
Well, in the intake
Bob,
process, you didn't actually have to look at those, did you?
No, it's just an affidavit in the intake process, but we do want to make sure that these are real, that this is real interest and real projects. And there's no evidence right now that we need to increase any of the caps or any of the limitations, or do away with any of the limitations.
Danielle, this is Bob. I will just chime in that while we've given allocations through to projects that have at least short list, I'm not sure if we ever actually have given any allocations to an actual executed PPA with a non-LSE, but we haven't seen any of those actually complete the process of actually come online with a PPA with a non-LSE. So we'd like to see this play out in a way that we gain some more information and more knowledge how this process works.
Okay, we've only had for a couple of years the non-LSE process for off takers in PPA in TPD allocations. So of course people can't get online that fast.
Yep, understood.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for that clarification.
We have a hand from David Person. Looks like David lowered his hand. Okay, no other questions in queue.
Okay, thanks, Yelena. I'll go to the next slide. Okay, the cap on the full allocation election. So this is something that also, you know, I think is an issue that the ISO is very open to hearing feedback on. We have gone back and forth internally with a couple of different ideas for how we might address the issue of small LSEs not having sufficient points or sufficient capacity to award to potentially larger projects. So the amount of capacity that they have and the limits that we placed on this full allocation election made it such that a small LSE could only use the full allocation election for a small project. We are sensitive to that issue, and we do want to consider a different type of limitation that might be more flexible for some of the large, or for some of the small LSEs in particular. We don't, however, want to draw a threshold. We want equal treatment for every type of LSE. So we don't want to create a threshold for a small LSE versus a large LSE. We'd like to develop a cap that appropriately can be applied to every LSE to enable them sufficient flexibility to use this full allocation election. So this is something that I think we do plan to make a more detailed proposal on in the next paper, but really wanted to hear from the small LSEs, and the LSEs in particular, on this issue with proposals before moving forward.
Okay, we have a hand from Tony Zimmer.
Okay, great.
Tony, go ahead. Looks like you got remuted. Okay, try again. I can hear you.
Thanks. Sorry, hit the button. No, thank you very much for highlighting this item. Just wanted to note that NCPA is discussing with its members, and we will likely be submitting some suggestions in the form of comments when we respond to the initial paper. So without going and elaborating on that for discussion today, we'll provide a more thoughtful response as part of our comments, and happy to discuss with you further.
Thank you.
We have no other. I'd just like to chime in that, we did consider some things, but as Daniel said, coming up with some sort of a threshold of, what small and what large is, that's something that's kind of arbitrary and hard to sell to FERC that it's appropriate. We would like to see, proposals from you folks. The concern we've got related to proposals is, we'd like it to be simple enough. We need to deal with this issue within the scoring process that we don't really have a lot of time to validate information going into the scoring process and then going into the validation and customer engagement window. We had more time for cluster 15, but moving to cluster 16 and forward, we're on the FERC timeline, which is a tighter timeline. So as you propose things, we're really hoping that what we receive are things that are something that can be implemented within the time frame we have. So I just wanted to make sure everybody's thinking in that way.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that comment. Just to give a general sense, our proposal will likely be focused on, providing evidence of, as an example, an existing resource that's set to retire, and the expectation is the integration process is really focused on projects that are meant to provide replacement to those existing resources. In some cases, they may be fairly large in size, so it's not intended to provide a disadvantageous kind of opportunity for the smaller folks, but really based on sound kind of long-term integrated resource planning, where if we have an existing facility that may be serving a larger proportionate size of load and we're expecting to replace that facility with a like in kind or otherwise facility, we would be kind of probably linking our proposal to that concept. So just a general sense, but yeah, we'll definitely take that in consideration as part of our further comments, but thank you.
Tony. We have no other hands in queue right now, Daniel.
Okay, we'll go to the next slide then. Okay, this is an issue that came up in kind of the final stages of proposal development regarding how commercial interest points would be awarded based on the interconnection service capacity. And I believe this was an issue in particular for mixed fuel resources. Bob has some data that he can provide on this, or at least an anecdote. But at this point, we are not proposing any changes to how to using the interconnection service capacity as the basis for the award of commercial interest points. And Bob, I'll see if you wanted to just add any notes from this process.
Well, I will add that we did take a look at it, and one thing that we saw within Cluster 15 is all of the Cluster 15 projects seeking full capacity delivery status were seeking it for the entire project. So we didn't receive any PCDS type projects to where that would play out in a very specific and obvious way. And we looked at the energy only projects to see if, well, did people split their projects between an energy only and a full capacity project all coming to the same POI. We didn't see that occur once. So we didn't see any issues play out that we thought really needed to be fixed. We think there's some equity really to the way that we have it now related to the interconnection service capacity as the benchmark. So at this point, we didn't see any need to make any changes, and feel that it worked well for Cluster 15.
Okay. And we have a hand from Susan. I think this is a new hand.
Hi.
Susan, go ahead.
Well, yes, I guess I would say it's a little bit of a chicken and egg here. I mean, I think part of the reason you didn't see PCDS projects is because there would be the need to get commercial interest points for as though a project was seeking 100% FCDS for the interconnection service capacity, and that was a hard hurdle. So I think the fact that you didn't see any is partly as a result of this policy and not the other way around. So I guess we'll put in comments, but I think you can't necessarily look at the fact that you didn't get any of these as evidence that you don't need to be able to split projects into energy only and FCDS portions. So I would just caution you against drawing that conclusion from what you're looking at.
Can I ask if there's can you explain sort of the market implication if there is this trend toward projects seeking points for the full project?
Again, I think people had a lot of choices for what they did with their projects for Cluster 15. And if a project would say have sought, let's say a solar plus solar, 50 megawatts of solar, I hate doing these on the fly, but I'll try it. 50 megawatts of storage and, 100 megawatts at the POI. If that's what they were planning to do, then they would be dissuaded from participating in this process because they might have only needed deliverability for the storage, but they would have had to get, in order to get 100 points and get the project through, they would have had to get points, commercial interest points, as though they were seeking FCDS for the entire project, even though they might not be what they were seeking. And so I think you just might have had people say, well, I'm just not going to submit that project. So it's hard to know what people would have done if they had done something other than what they did. But I think the fact that this policy was in place really does discourage projects like that. I will concede that most projects are not configured that way, but I think some might have considered that given the new rules, but were dissuaded from or discouraged from doing that by this kind of a rule. So anyway, that was just made up on the fly, but just to illustrate the point.
Okay, thanks, Susan.
Okay, no other hands in queue.
Okay, there was a commitment in track 2 that we would clarify the long lead time resource eligibility for system need points. We did address this item in track 3 of the IPE 2023 process, and we've added those elements to our tariff, where there's now a process where the CPUC and local regulatory authorities would give us a list in the case of the CPUC, it comes in their TPP portfolios that are adopted in a decision and transmitted to the ISO in advance of work on that subsequent transmission planning process. And then in the course of the annual transmission process, the ISO will seek feedback from stakeholders on that list and formally adopt a list of long lead time resources with specificity to technology type and location and POI in the final approved transmission plan every year. So we started this process with the last 2024-2025 transmission plan. We will continue to build this process out and kind of go through the full process with the CPUC portfolios and any other inputs that we receive from LRAs in the 25-26 transmission planning process. And so that once we complete that transmission plan and it's approved by our board, there will be a very clear list of long lead time resources that will be then eligible for system need points in cluster 16 when it opens. So for that reason, we feel that we've sufficiently addressed this item and don't propose any additional process or definitions at this point. I'll take any questions.
There's no questions, thank you.
Great, we'll go to the next slide then. And I think Bob is going to take this one.
Yes, so related to energy-only projects, under the new process, we wanted to be able to kind of track and see how this new process worked out. And we did receive a significant number of energy-only projects. And, just to give you a feel, since cluster 10, between cluster 10 and cluster 14, we didn't receive any energy-only interconnection requests in those clusters. And now in cluster 15, a third of the projects are energy only. So we knew that could play out in that manner. So we wanted to be able to at least look at the type of projects coming in and see if there's any adjustments that might need to be made based on the fact that we're basing the capacity that we'll accept to be studied on the CPUC portfolio for energy only projects. We didn't try to align the projects that we were receiving with the amount of capacity by technology within the CPUC portfolio. And that was something we wanted to see if there was anything that might need to be done. We did see some projects that really didn't align with portfolio. We did get a handful of battery energy storage projects coming as energy only, which aren't part of the energy only portfolio and really don't fit as an energy only project in my mind, because typically those need full capacity delivery status. But for the most part, the projects did align well between solar and wind as energy only projects, the ones that really make sense as being energy only. So just looking through all the information, we came to the conclusion that we didn't see anything significant enough to propose any changes. So that's where we're at now. And if anybody has any thoughts that you'd like to share at this point, open it up for questions.
Yeah, we have a hand from Sushant Bharavit. Sushant, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Sushant Bharavit from Clearway. Bob, this is related to energy only, but also related to merchant zones where most energy only projects entered. The question was, how would a merchant zone that becomes a TPD zone in future, or maybe as a result of a transmission planned approved project, how the energy only projects that are putting significant capital at risk and efforts, how would that transition be handled? And would really urge CAISO to think about when that change happens, providing a framework for projects that are already in the queue and are ahead of any projects that may come in, say, cluster 16, 17, providing them a pathway to utilize that capability as and when it becomes available, instead of just resulting in queue churn where punting it down to later queue clusters.
Yeah. Yeah, you can go, actually you did provide that in your comments on the scoping paper. At this point, that's somewhat of a change to what we did in 2023, and we weren't really anticipating going any further, making changes on how we set up the merchant zones at this point in time. The tariff currently states that projects coming in as energy only for cluster 15 and beyond must always stay energy only. So we didn't plan on making those kind of changes. So we really felt that energy only projects that come in as energy only ought to be projects that anticipate always being energy only, and let the projects that come into the merchant zones that actually are willing to build capacity, and then if it becomes available later on, those projects would be the ones that actually have the ability to compete for that new capacity that's available in a merchant zone.
Yeah, I think we, correct me, but I don't think we saw any merchant projects, right? Everyone just converted to energy only. And that's where, when we played it out in future, if a zone becomes a TPD zone, we just felt that there would be transmission capacity that remains unused for a couple of years when there are projects that may have taken up land positions and have advanced significantly in the development process. But yeah, something we would, I think, keep recommending that, creating a pathway for that.
Okay, and just to be clear, we did receive a number of merchant projects, but eventually they did drop out prior to the beginning of the study. So I have to assume that based on the information they got within the scoping meetings that we had, that they decided their project really wasn't as viable as they'd hoped.
Thanks, Bob.
Let me see. I think we have hands from Susan Schneider as well. Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, just by way of further explanation, I think those projects dropped out, maybe not so much because of what they got in the scoping meeting, but because of what came out of the TPP. I think they were hoping that something might, so there may be some policy-driven upgrades that could come out of the TPP, because they didn't really know when they put in the interconnection requests, and then when that didn't seem to happen, they were hoping that there would be something that would help their zone and make it so they didn't have to pay. And when that didn't happen, I think that was at least from discussions I had, that was probably the biggest catalyst.
Okay, I appreciate that, Susan. And just one other thing to add to what you were saying, Shashank. I see this bit of an issue or a concern that by opening the door for projects to come in as energy only and then sit there hoping that one day some capacity will become available, they're basically tying up some reliability network upgrades that may not be moving forward, because the project's not moving forward until some deliverable capacity becomes available. And then, that kind of leads to projects just lingering in the queue waiting. So I do see a downside to that. If you see some upsides to it that might override that, feel free to provide in your comments.
Thanks, Bob. We have no other hands in queue right now.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. So one of the items that happened in track 2 is we didn't provide, even though we kind of anticipated doing, allowing distributed energy only projects, all known as WDAPs with PTOs, allow them to go through the scoring process. We didn't really develop enough of the tariff criteria to really develop criteria within the tariff to propose a PERT to allow that. So we committed to go back and do this. So we plan to put together a process to where WDAP projects and as well as distribution interconnected projects from non-CPUC jurisdictional entities can put their projects in the queue, and they would be in the same mode as the ISO interconnection projects to actually have to give us their scoring, go through the scoring and ranking process to be included in the study. So we have proposed a method for doing that to where we would, those type of distribution projects would have to give us the scores, their scoring information to be scored, in the same process as ISO interconnection projects. And then if they are scored high enough to be included in a study, that their capacity, their resource adequacy eligible capacity would then be counted towards the 150% threshold, just like all other projects. So we've proposed kind of the basic outline of how that would work to include those projects. And just to be clear, while that would take place for cluster 16 forward, it wouldn't have any impact on the projects that are being studied now in cluster 15. So with that, if there are any questions, please raise your hand.
Yes, hi. Okay, I had just two sets of questions here. First of all, what exactly happened with the WDAT projects? Did you not have any of them that you considered in the cluster 15 intake process for any category of anything?
Within cluster 15, they did not provide any scoring. We didn't have a mechanism in the tariff to allow for that. So they were included. If we didn't have any way to actually cut them off by having low scores. So all of them were included, and they were not included in the 150% threshold. So in essence, in cluster 15, we're actually studying in some areas more than the 150%.
Okay, so they were included in the merchant zones and also in the TPD zones?
Not in the merchant zones.
No merchant
zones. Only in TPD zones.
Okay,
yes.
So none were included in the merchant, only in the, but all were included in the TPD.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
TPD and energy only zones. Yeah.
This is Robert.
I'm sorry, energy only also? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, excuse me, not energy only.
WDAT's at nodes with 0 TPD available in the intake information. Essentially, we're just informed that there's no deliverability available, and they were converted immediately to energy only.
Okay, so
yes.
let me
Thanks
just
for that, Robert. I was just going to say that process to where the very first step we do once projects have been determined to be complete, we check to see our projects that are seeking full capacity delivery status at a point of interconnection that actually has some. And if there is no deliverable capacity, then those projects don't move forward. So that process was used for both WDAT as well as ISO interconnected projects.
Okay, so if they were in merchant zones, then they were not accepted at all, and if they were in TPD zones, they were all accepted.
That's correct.
Well, they were all
except for the caveat.
They were just their studies were immediately completed.
Well, at least for those that there was no deliverability available.
Okay,
yes.
let me try. Okay, so in merchant zones, none of them were accepted, and in TPD zones, they were all accepted. Is that?
No, they're all accepted, and then run through the test to see is there available capacity, and if there was not, they were not eligible to move forward into studies because there's nothing available.
Well, their studies were already done. It's a little bit of wordsmithing, I suppose, but my understanding is the way we characterize is that their studies were already done and there's no deliverability, so they're energy only.
Okay, so let me start again. In merchant zones, none of them were accepted. In TPD zones, if they were at POIs where there was no deliverability, they were not accepted. If there were,
so I'm choking on the none of them were accepted. My understanding is our tariff does not give us that option to not accept them. So we accepted them. We just did the studies instantaneously because we already have the study results and informed them of the results immediately.
Okay, they were not accepted for the further study in cluster 15.
Well, you can use whatever words you want, but I don't agree to those words.
Yeah, there was found to be no need to take them into further studies because we already had study results that was adequate to tell them there wasn't any deliverability.
Okay. So you treated them just like transmission connected projects, which if they were at a POI that had no deliverability, they were not accepted for study. Okay. And so you with WDAP projects, you effectively did the same thing. They just didn't move forward. Okay.
Yeah,
No.
I would just clarify it this way, Susan. If a interconnection project came seeking full capacity delivery status to a POI with no capacity, they did not move forward. They were actually withdrawn. In the
Okay.
case of a WDAP project that came to a seeking full capacity delivery status at a POI that had no capacity, we gave them study results and said,
Okay.
based on our studies, you do not have any deliverability. Our studies are done. We didn't withdraw them.
Okay, but all right. So, but you didn't. Okay, I'm going to leave that alone. If they went to a POI where there was deliverability, you didn't subject to them to the scoring process. You simply accepted them into the study process and didn't subject to the scoring process. Everyone else, all the transmission connected projects went through the scoring process. So what was accepted for study was whatever cleared the transmission connected projects scoring process plus whatever WDAP projects had applied at those POIs.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That was all I was trying to get was some clarification on what you actually already did. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. And that's what I was looking for. So thanks.
Okay, there's no other hands at the moment, Bob.
Okay, let's move to the next slide. So this will go into topics that were under our draw proposal section 3, which is the ISO comments to monitor and revisit policy ideas for my 2023 track 3. So let's go to the next slide. So something that came up late in track 3, too late for us to really be able to really take it through the stakeholder process, was to allow energy-only projects that go into commercial operation to come back into the queue to seek deliverability, where they would be treated very much like a WDAP project, where all the reliability studies have been done and they're actually online. So the only studies that would be needed for them would be the deliverability studies, but they would still have to go through the full process of giving the study deposit, the commercial readiness deposit, be scored, and then if they score high enough, which typically I would think they would go into a study process to be studied to see if there are deliverability network upgrades that would be required for them, and if there is, and actually go through the testing process to make sure there is deliverability at their POI. So for this particular item, we have one entity that has suggested this, and we toyed with coming up with a proposal for this one, but this is one of the main areas that, as Danielle alluded to, that we thought, well, what are we really trying to solve here? What's really the problem that we're trying to solve? So we thought, rather than come forward with a proposal, we wanted to hear more stakeholders comment on this to see what their thoughts on this are, and those that believe this is something that we should consider as an option to allow this type of process to occur. What is actually the problem that we're trying to solve? It's kind of hard to come up with a good proposal and solution when you don't have really know the full extent of what the problem is that we're trying to solve. So for this one, we're looking for stakeholder feedback to get better information to see if this is something that we need to move forward with. From our perspective, we didn't really see a problem that needs to be solved by doing this. So with that, are there any questions?
Yeah, we have a few hands in the queue. Actually, we'll go to Susan and then Lauren and then Vineet in the order that they raise their hands. Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Okay. So just a couple of clarification questions again. So projects, cluster 14 and earlier, these projects, if they're at energy only and they reach COD, they can already come in for a TPD allocation. It's not this full study process. And in fact, I'm not sure that this really was actually the suggestion, but anyway, it's not this full study process, but they can come in and ask for, in a commercial group, they could come in and ask for a TPD allocation, right? Still.
Did I hear you correctly? You're talking cluster 14 and earlier, is that right?
Yes, yes.
Yes, that's correct
Okay.
for pre-cluster 15.
Okay.
This
So
would impact only cluster 15 and moving
and
forward.
later. Okay. It wasn't clear in the scoping document. I think you did actually clarify it somewhat in the straw proposal. So I think my understanding is whoever's, people proposing this are proposing it not to be able to go through the whole study process all over again, but simply if any energy only project reaches COD for cluster 15 and later, they should be allowed to also come in and ask for an allocation in the commercial group. That's I know there have been various things that have been thrown out there, but I don't know that they're proposing to have to go through another 2-year study process and all of that. I think the question
Well, Susan, just to be clear, that was the proposal. So,
okay.
and I
Okay.
think, and you're raising something that I did want to address with this topic is that some of the comments we received based on the scoping document were to do things that you were suggesting that really would be further adjustments to what has already been decided in IPE 2023. And those items are not in scope with this item. This item is to actually allow projects to come in and be studied. We're not really looking to entertain making changes to what was approved by the board from IPE 2023.
Okay. Well, I know I understand why you're saying you won't do that. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to leave it the way it is. But thank you for those clarifications.
Thanks, Susan. Our next hand is from Lauren Carr. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Lauren Carr from CalCCA. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to thank the CAISO for including this item here. I think CalCCA was the party or one of the parties that wanted to see this item included in scope. And I think, we're thinking that these projects could potentially be more viable than earlier stage projects development. And if that's the case, they should be able to seek a pathway to contribute to the state's RA requirements and future RCPP requirements that could, we expect, have a deliverability component to them. We've been seeing some examples from our members where the energy only pathway could expedite opportunities for financing projects and getting them built in a timely manner. And I know you've seen CalCCA's proposal on the topic, and we've tried to structure it in a way that would prevent overutilizing this pathway to circumvent the scoring process that was developed for Q intake and for TPD allocation, which I know is a concern of the CAISOs, I think. And that's why our proposal included kind of going through the full 2-year study process, and then also having some sort of limit on how often this pathway could be used. And so I was just wondering if you are seeing any issues with CAISO's proposal that we should look to address to make it workable from the CAISO's perspective, or is it really more documentation around the problem that's needed?
Yeah, I will, I guess, answer it this way. The portfolio does see a need for a significant amount of energy-only capacity. And once projects are online, they're fulfilling a role that is needed on the system. And we do need a certain amount of energy-only projects. And then you've got a lot of other projects that are competing for full capacity delivery status that actually need full capacity delivery status to be fully viable and to be able to move forward. So we're not sure if it really is the best fit to allow projects that have proven to be viable, gone into commercial operation, and then come back and start competing with other projects that are truly needed as RA projects, because they're really more the type of technology that is a better fit for the RA paradigm. So, that's kind of the struggle we're going through on this. So, if you could kind of think about that and provide some comments related to that, that would be helpful.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. We have a hand from Jennifer Fletcher. Jennifer, go ahead.
Structure. Can you just clarify that when you say that you do not see any queue data supporting the need, and based on your conversation you just had with Lauren, what you're referring to is the quantities, like the gross quantities in the queue and on the system of energy only and deliverable resources seem to match up with need right now. And I think what our concern is that there are some temporal issues about when resources can provide deliverability that can be served by energy only resources if energy only is viewed as more of an interim solution while the transmission system is catching up.
Okay, so that's.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Danielle.
Sorry, I was just going to ask, I was under the impression that there is still a pathway through contracting for that type of approach where, one could structure a contract to go energy only until the project is deliverable, or until the project has all the necessary network upgrades and things like that. So I think this is why we're kind of need a little more detail on the actual problem that this eliminates or that this solves.
Right, and I think that in cluster 14, that contracting approach makes sense, but I think that post cluster 15, projects may be willing to operate energy only and as was just mentioned, be capable of being financed and built as energy only, but would also like to provide the resource adequacy needs to the system and the off-takers when the transmission system is built. But since you can't enter the queue as FCDS if there isn't deliverability available in that year, then I think that contracting option is no longer available. But if I'm mistaken, please let me know.
That last statement of yours is correct.
Yeah. See, I think the problem from our perspective is one of temporal needs of when would you like to begin construction and providing versus how long are you willing to wait for deliverability to open up at the POI.
Okay, so if you could elaborate that in your comments, we'd appreciate it.
Absolutely, thank you.
And Jennifer, what was your affiliation?
Semper Infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, our next hand is from FTAB, Ellen. FTAB, go ahead. Can we unmute FTAB again?
Hi, Bob. This is Aftab from SP Energy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Bob. Just a curious question. I appreciate the opportunity for developers to, provide feedback around the problem that we're trying to solve. I agree with the earlier speaker. There is a lot of risks to commercialization and financing such projects, and having an opportunity for obtaining an RR revenue is definitely one of the problems that we're trying to solve in order to get higher IRRs, right? So I think it'll be good to see that narrative in the comments. But my curiosity is on, why, if there is a concern around energy only projects circumventing the scoring process, to achieve deliverability later, why, what was the driver of CAISO allowing energy only projects to apply for deliverability after achieving COD? I mean, what was the thought there?
You mean for cluster 14 and prior?
Right.
Yeah, well, it was something that we had opened up at the very beginning of the process when we started doing allocation of transmission plan deliverability. And over time, I think we may have given out capacity to an energy-only project once. And moving forward in cluster 15, we just felt it was time to say, okay, let's not have projects lingering in the queue as energy-only, hoping for deliverability. You know, we're seeing the issue with that we put in the intra-cluster prioritization process with cluster 14 in order to deal with the fact that we've got many projects tying up resource adequacy type reliability capacity and requiring a number of upgrades that we know in the long run aren't going to be necessary. And so we didn't think it was appropriate to continue to have that kind of a open door where so many projects can come in and then continue to linger in the queue, hoping for deliverability in the future. So we designed the TPD allocation process for cluster 15 forward to where energy-only projects, you know, for one, they can't get deliverability, but and also the fact that we don't want projects trying to circumvent the scoring process by going energy-only and then later seeking deliverability. So we felt that the reason for doing it originally wasn't worthwhile continuing because it created more problems than it actually helped solve in some solution manner.
Right. That is helpful, Bob. But I think, you know, one thing we need to remember is I believe the energy only project will also be responsible for hosting their share of the shared network upgrades moving forward. Right. That's one change. Right. And I think the other thing that I think about is that, and I'll put also in the comments too, where is that, you know, many of the projects that have recently achieved their SCDA allocations and what, you know, I think they're going to have exposures of long, exposures of, long durations of interim deliverability to achieve their FCDS or PCDS status. There are many long duration network upgrades in there. And no project in PG&E really achieved any, you know, ISD acceleration, at least in the first go of this first round of this process. So, you know, they're also, I think there are going to be challenges to commercializing those projects also. So I think we need to think about a balanced approach here where we need to keep an eye on projects that also that have allocation. How long are they lingering in the queue, and you know, what is their path to commercialization? Because that could eventually become a reliability issue, right? If these RA projects are not commercializing on time. So I'll put all of that in there and something to ponder upon.
Okay. Yeah, I was actually going to make the same comment that Danielle made earlier, is that we don't see the interconnection process being able to solve every issue that's out there, or at least being necessarily the appropriate way to solve every issue that's out there. And we really see contracting as maybe the better solution to handle these issues where you've got these longer lead time deliverability network upgrades to where projects could actually come online sooner as energy only, waiting for deliverability to happen. But we'd like to see contracting be a way to actually solve that problem rather than have projects go some other route. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, we have a hand from Vineet Marathe.
From Clearway. Yeah, on the concern where the energy only projects would linger in the queue, occupying, you know, RNU and headroom and stuff like that. I think ISO has already like a proposal of CVC requirement for energy only, where within like 7 years in the queue, even for energy only projects, right, like TPD projects, they would need to show CVC. I think that would act, you know, as a backstop and not have these linger around anymore. So just wanted to provide that, you know, comment.
Yeah, and that's something that Jason will handle later. I think it's actually going to be the last item on, well, it may not be Jason handling it, but it's a topic that will be discussed related to energy-only projects. But even still, even if we have a mechanism to deal with projects through the CVC projects that are lingering in the queue, they still have lingered in the queue for a significant period of time, tying up upgrades. So that mechanism to get projects out that are lingering isn't necessarily the best way to deal with it. So it's something that we are constantly having to try to figure out what's the best way to handle that process.
Okay, yeah, I think that was due to no CVC requirement, but yeah, we can talk about it more later. Thank you.
Okay, there's no other hands in queue.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is somewhat in line with what, this discussion we just had related to projects that have long lead time deliverability network upgrades, where they could come online sooner, or they may want to actually wait for those upgrades to happen. But under the current deliverability process, they've only got so many opportunities before they are no longer eligible to seek deliverability and actually will be withdrawn. So entities have suggested, well, maybe projects that are in those situations would actually be able to defer seeking deliverability. And again, we didn't provide a proposal on this one. We don't think that's really the appropriate way to go on this one. This is one that we'd have to really see some inputs that really is something that we're not aware of, and a solution that we think is workable to actually move forward with this one. Just to give you some of our perspective, we've had projects that actually receive deliverability and linger in the queue, and they say they're going to move forward. They said, we're going to move forward by we don't need a PPA to move forward. So they got deliverability, and then some of those got PPAs quickly, but then some haven't and lingered in the queue, actually tying up deliverability. So that's been a problem. In this case, they would be deferring their deliverability, but again, they'll be lingering in the queue, waiting for that process. And I don't know if it's the optimal way to deal with the queue by having projects come in early and then kind of have a race to be the first one in, and then defer their deliverability in hopes that they'll be ready once that the actual network upgrade that is coming out of maybe the transmission planning process is getting closer to go into commercial operation or into to be energized. Then they'd be seeking deliverability. But in the meantime, they're sitting in the queue, hanging out in the queue, holding up, or at least maybe causing more reliability network upgrades for later projects than are really needed because they're not moving forward. So we don't see that as the optimal solution, bottom line. But at any rate, if you have some specific ideas that you think are worth us considering, feel free to put that in your comments. So with that, are there any questions?
We have a couple hands in queue. We have Susan and then Nancy. Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Bob. I thought I understood what this concept, but I think I'm confused. When this talked about long lead time resources, I didn't interpret it, and I think that given the parties that commented on this, I think it was Invenergy and ACP. I thought that you were referring here to, designated long lead time resources like offshore wind or something, not just generally projects waiting for long upgrades or RNUs. So I'm a little confused about. Can you clarify what resources you thought this was going possibly apply to?
Yeah, Susan, in reality, I think you're right. This is one that this isn't the one I wrote up, and I kind of got off on a track that was wrong. But I think the primary focus here is long lead time resources, to where these resources aren't able to compete for deliverability in the standard time frame because they're just not moving that far along, and they're not going to be able to get a PPA in time in order to truly seek deliverability within the standard time frame. And so in that case, they were seeking to actually defer their deliverability. But again, this is something that we have decided that we didn't think this was the right approach at this point in time to actually allow them to defer deliverability. Or I guess I should probably open this up for Danielle to speak to this a bit more if she has some additional items that she wants to address with this.
Okay, but were the resources that you were talking about here like long lead time again, I wish we had just had better, we weren't using the same phrases to apply to this to different things, but I thought that this was for, and I think this is back when you had the last IPE initiative where there was at one point consideration of allowing long time resources, designated long, capital LLT kind of resources to defer their first deliverability request, but not that it was just for people who had long lead time RNUs or something like that. Can you just clarify that, or Danielle or Bob? Danielle, I think you're on
you must
mute.
be double muted.
Thank you, sorry. And Bob and I are dressed alike today, we didn't plan that. This is the issue of the long lead time resource technologies and giving them an opportunity to defer their first attempt to seek deliverability. There are sort of two similar issues. So, I think we'll defer the issue, sorry, poor choice of words, but we'll talk about the issue of the long lead time network upgrades later. But this is the issue of the resources that come into the queue as a long lead time resource, and then may not start construction for several years, may not engage in contracting for several years. So we explored in track 3, giving them an opportunity to wait to seek their first deliverability allocation until they're closer to contracting. And the issue with that was we just didn't receive any consistency in stakeholder opinion. There was a lot of kind of even support and opposition for the concept. And so unless we can come up with some alternative proposals that stakeholders are more universally open to and accepting of, we don't intend to move this forward.
Okay, I really appreciate the clarification. I think, and again, from the parties that commented, I think that's how people interpreted this. But thank you very much for clarifying that.
Thanks, Nancy. Sorry. Thanks, Susan. We're going to go to Nancy. Go ahead.
The California Wind Energy Association. So this issue seems really closely tied to the policies that the PUC will be adopting in the RP proceeding for long-term planning, that is the RCPPP. And we don't yet know how that's going to turn out. So on the one hand, if the PUC provides strong encouragement for LSCs to contract with LLT resources at least 6 years in advance of COD, then those resources in the Q16 process should be able to get PPAs in time to secure deliverability in that cycle. But on the other hand, if LSCs are not sufficiently incentivized to sign long-term contracts, projects might be better off skipping QC16 until they can get at least one deferral opportunity. So I'm just wondering, by proposing not to allow deferral, is CAISO assuming that PUC is not going to be providing those strong signals to sign long-term contracts early, or are you suggesting that kind of in any case, it's really better for projects just not to jump in the queue until they're further along in the development process? And the other things I'm just wondering, in that case, we will lose the opportunity to gather market signals to see if developers are responding to the zones that the PUC has selected for development. So we've been critical of the areas that the PUC has identified for commercial development, saying, you really didn't pick the right areas, and we're hoping they correct that in this cycle. But one problem of not encouraging people to get in the queue early is we won't be getting these signals about what zones are truly viable. So anyway, I just want to throw that out there and gather any more thinking in that area. Thanks.
Thanks, Nancy. I would say we are not presupposing any outcome on the procurement side from the CPUC or other LRAs. So this is really just, this is us kind of following the procurement process and wanting wanting the ISO interconnection process to be able to support whatever procurement regime takes place and moves forward. So it's more of the two examples you gave, it's more the latter, where we are suggesting that resources get into the queue when the timing aligns better with commercial development. And I still want to acknowledge too, I don't think we've noted that we are still reserving deliverability for these long lead time resources. And that, I think provides some comfort and some certainty to certain developers of resource technologies that there will be deliverability available when the time comes for them to seek it.
Yeah, certainly it's essential. Yeah, okay. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. We have no other questions in queue.
Danielle, I think this is where I hand it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, we received some additional stakeholder suggestions that we just wanted to address here. Go to the next slide again. Okay, so this is sort of more the issue that I think Bob was speaking to earlier. And this touches on the issue that we addressed a little bit, speaker from Sempra mentioned, with some sort of system for having deliverability reservations for projects that are awaiting their long lead time delivery network upgrades. These are topics that we really began to explore and dig into in track 3. And I think the ISO is struggling with how we can provide any additional flexibility here without exacerbating some of the issues that we have of projects getting in the queue too early or lingering in the queue. And so we are not proposing additional changes at this time. I think there are a couple different issues that are being explored and that have been raised by stakeholders in these comments. And I do want to make sure that we're kind of defining them and teasing them apart to the extent necessary. And if there's a sort of more specific individual issue that needs more attention, we're willing to look at those. But I think at this point, having made some pretty significant changes to the deliverability allocation process in track 3, we want to see how those changes, how they look and the impact that they have on resources seeking deliverability before making additional changes to our deliverability allocation methodology or timelines. So I'll stop there. I imagine this is something that there will be a few comments on and suggestions. So happy to take stakeholder feedback.
We have a hand from Sushant Bharavit.
Hi, can you hear me?
Sushant, go ahead. Yes, now we can.
Yeah, hi, Sushant from Clearway Energy Group. Thanks, Danielle. Yeah, and this is something where we feel CAISO made a really important enhancement in terms of the RNU headroom. And that has been a very similar ask on the DNU front, where I think we are testing it out for the first time, how it works on RNUs. But I think the building blocks exist, where if there is headroom behind certain upgrades, projects can score, compete for that, and get some assurance of early interconnection. What we are asking is a very similar framework for allocating deliverability that is not just a year ahead of the COD, which the NQC process today looks at that 1 year ahead. But given the duration of upgrades now, which is 6 plus 8 plus years, and upgrade delays that are being as early as the last TDF forum, we saw some upgrades that had initially been planned for 2024, then went to 28, now 2031. I think this is where using the same framework as RNU headroom for DNUs would really be helpful for, I think, all the stakeholders as well, where there is possible ratepayer benefit where there is unused capacity that's nobody using right now. I appreciate that this will be a difficult study, but I think scoring projects and filtering them out to a smaller set will probably help. And the second point here is that projects have now shown significant commercial readiness. And so these are projects that have already been in the queue that are viable real projects. So providing them that opportunity would, we'd appreciate if CAISO gives it a very serious thought. Thanks.
Thanks, Sushant. That's helpful. And I think at least a little bit different than how I was reading some of your comments. So appreciate the finer point.
Our next hand is from Susan.
Yeah, hi. I apologize for casting for all these clarifications, but it seemed like the title of this changed from the scoping document, and then I'm still having trouble figuring out what it was. At first, I thought this was trying to reserve deliverability as projects enter the queue to make sure that their deliverability was still there when they went to the TPD allocation process. So I'm figuring now that that's not what this is supposed to be, but it's supposed to be like if some certain DNUs aren't done yet and there's interim deliverability, but instead of awarding it on an interim basis, you would, this is sort of a return of the earlier topic of long-term interim deliverability or long-term, I mean, I guess I'm, can you just sort of explain what this is? I'm just having a hard time from the written material understanding it.
I think it's a somewhat, and I don't think there's a defined solution, Susan, but I think the issue is, projects are in the queue and they're quoted very long, like 8 to 10 year lead times for their DNUs. So can they get some sort of assurance of deliverability ahead of time? And there have been kind of multiple different shades, again, of these types of issues that have been raised. And so this is our looks like our failed attempt to kind of put a name to that problem. So I think it's all a little bit ambiguous right now, both in terms of the problem that we're trying to solve and the solutions.
Okay, so instead of this interim deliverability every year, perhaps they might get their FCDS early if you can figure out how to do that. Is that what this means?
Yeah, I think we've had those requests in both track 2 and track 3, and considered like some type of, and in the deliverability allocation initiative as well. We had looked at whether we could provide longer term interim deliverability or some kind of conditional deliverability, and it's challenging to do that, and I'll let the engineers elaborate if necessary on why.
Okay.
But I think the other issue is just this, it goes back to the timing issue of, what's the best time to get in the queue, knowing that the infrastructure is going to take a long time to build.
Okay. Okay. And then I have, it's a little bit of a tangent question, so I apologize. But if someone, based on what Vinny was talking about, if a project goes through the intercluster prioritization and they get an earlier COD, okay, so they're basically able to come online before other RNUs are done. If their DNUs are finished, can they still get FCDS even though all the RNUs aren't finished that they're assigned to, because they've already been told they don't need those RNUs to reach COD? Do they get FCDS?
I'm going to see
is that question clear?
It might be clear to one of the planning engineers. So I don't know if anyone wants to chime in on that.
Oh, this is Vinay. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Vinay.
Hi. I think I understood the question, but I don't think we have internally discussed that. So if you could put that in comment, we'll take it.
Well, we did actually. That was one of the things that we had asked to be added to the scope. as a clarification. So yeah, okay. Well, I guess we'll put it again in comments and see if we can get an answer. We're considering, and we haven't gotten down to this yet, but a lot of the LSA questions were clarification questions. So you may see this again in the BPM change management process, just in an attempt to get that clarification. So, all right.
Yeah, maybe I missed. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we'll take an internal look at that.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have, is this a new hand from Sushant?
Yes, hi. Daniel, I wanted to make another point, which is aligned with what Susan brought up, where especially if co-located resources that have a line of sight to early interconnection because of the intra-cluster prioritization, then it becomes really important that those projects where developers are seeing a need, where there is commercial interest for an early offtake for energy only, if those projects can also get a pathway to this DNU headroom and a long-term interim deliverability commitment, that would be extremely beneficial, I think, for even RA offtake. And since CAISO has already provided that framework for an early interconnection of energy-only resource, providing the same project a framework to at least compete for deliverability that may remain unused, I think becomes, the RNU headroom construct becomes more meaningful if it is paired with the DNU headroom. Thanks.
Sushant. All right, we have no other hands in the queue, Danielle. Okay, thanks, Elena. Next slide, please. Okay, and I believe on this issue, I believe Jason is going to take this.
Hey, Danielle. Eric Geese was, anyways, for this one, the question or proposal was to adjust the interconnection agreement execution to be after the deliverability allocation or after a project receives its allocation and retains it. And the ISO did take this back. We talked through it, and given the FERC Order 2023 was recently approved, we have yet to see the timelines of FERC Order 2023 play out. We opted to not take this proposal forward. We can
have a hand
go
from
to Susan.
Yeah, hi, Jason. Two questions. First of all, for cluster 15, do you know, will they have to sign GIAs before the first TPD allocation results are available for them?
I believe so. I don't have the timing in front of me, so I can't answer that definitively. But I am aware of the timelines. I do believe, I think it's close, right? So the tariff says all GIAs must be executed or filed unexecuted within 120 calendar days, unless there's an affected system timeline issue in which they must be executed or filed unexecuted within 210 days. So I do think that entire 210-day timeline at its furthest extent is still before the first TPD allocation results are published.
Okay, so I guess if a project has to sign a GIA before they get any TPD allocation results, okay, so the COD in that GIA would be the one that came out of the studies, the earliest achievable COD out of the studies,
correct.
Is that right?
Yep,
okay,
that's correct.
And so if they do get a TPD allocation, maybe that might be okay. But if they don't, then they don't really know if they even have a project, because there's this 3 strikes and you're out thing where if you don't get an allocation, that you're done. And already, if you don't get an allocation the first time, unless you're going to proceed to build the project anyway. I mean, what if somebody just went ahead and built the project? You're not allowed to convert to energy only, right? And if they don't get an allocation, they would simply have an energy only project at the end. Is that what would happen?
I believe I see your point. I'm not sure I have an exact answer.
Okay, and if they did go ahead, move ahead and build the project and then reach COD, would they be able to come in the commercial group and ask again for an allocation?
So you're presuming that they have gone through the 3 strikes or the 3 opportunity, 3 bites of the apple to seek an allocation and still have not?
Yeah, let's say they don't get an allocation, but they've signed a GIA some years earlier, which they were required to do, which has the COD that comes out of the studies. By that time, they would have had to start building their project potentially at that point. The PTO is building upgrades for them. Let's just say they don't just drop out at that point. They have to sign a COD or a GIA and they do it because you made them. Okay, and then they proceed and have to meet all the milestones and authorization to proceed and all this other stuff. And so they do that. And so at the end of 3 years, they don't have an allocation. What happens to them? I mean, they're and they may have already had to start to build their project because that's what's in there. The PTO is building upgrades for them because that's what it says. What is a logical conclusion at that point of what would happen to them? They have to leave the queue even though everything's partly built? Is that what would have to happen? If they did that?
Susan, yeah, your point is, I think, very well made. I don't have an answer for you.
Because there's milestones in there, right, that they would have to comply with. And they can't delay their COD. I mean, if they're already beyond 7 years, for example, they would have to meet viability criteria. That's not possible. They don't have. Yeah, I mean, I just think this is going to take a little bit more working through of what exactly is being required here and how realistic it is for a project that 2 years after they sign it may have 0 project. What happens to them? And I just don't understand how this can really work. So I guess we'll put in some more comments on this, but I just feel like these things are just not really thought through to their logical conclusion, if there is such a thing here, as to how this would actually work.
Yeah, Susan, I think written comments would be really helpful here. That'll allow the ISO team to really chew on the variable scenarios that could play out. And in your written comments, if you could identify those individual scenarios where, maybe there's a small handful of them that could play out, we'd appreciate seeing seeing the written comments on.
Yeah, I mean, I could see, for example, having to start upgrades that were triggered by the cluster, but then at the end of 2 years down the road, a bunch of projects are kicked out of the queue. Well, what about the upgrades? The people that are left have to. Anyway, again, we'll put in some of these questions, but I just think it doesn't. This policy. I understand what you're saying about not wanting to change things, and it probably is terrible to have to go in and ask FERC about all of this with Order 2023, but there's just too many unanswered questions about how this will work. So we'll go ahead and try and put in some constructive comments and trying to help the discussion along.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Susan.
We don't have any other hands in queue, Jason.
Okay, great. I am not sure who's taking the next slide. Danielle?
Yeah. So we had multiple requests, and some of this is maybe along the lines of clarifications as well about when we would provide updated data to inform the interconnection request window. We are considering all of that feedback, but we don't view any of those clarifications as requiring tariff changes. So, Susan, I'm not sure if this is what you're referring to as one of those things that you sought clarification to, but we do plan to continue to improve the availability of data throughout this process and keep updating that data at key milestones. So we're hearing you on that.
And we have a new hand from Susan as well.
Yeah, just for LSA, we did make a fairly concrete suggestion about preliminary data coming out after the TPD allocation results are due in March for the October interconnection request window for cluster 16, and then final data coming out shortly after the transmission plan was allocated. And we're talking about really the POI mapping data and other information like, substations that have no more room, and, the things where so people know well in advance before October which POIs to stay away from, which ones are more attractive. This is what we're looking for. So we did, at least with respect to the TPD availability, make a fairly concrete proposal for that. If it's not addressed in this forum, where would that be addressed, and how might this other information that comes out in scoping meetings and things like where to stay away from, where you should go, that kind of thing. People really do need that well in advance of scoping meetings, or shortly before, even shortly well in advance of the interconnection window opening.
Yeah, and I think that these requests will come out throughout the process, where when we will be releasing the data, you'll see that. So we're working through your requests. I'm not sure if we're at a place where we can commit to those certain timeframes, but we are looking at them internally and working to get you the data that you are asking for when you're asking for it. So we need to discuss a little bit more internally, but there are multiple opportunities for that type of interaction with these types of requests. We also, I did want to note that we are providing interconnection reports now with redacted and with all confidential information redacted, which is another approval that we got in track 2 that should provide additional information to stakeholders. So this is kind of just, I put this in the category, Susan, of just like process improvements. And, we have interconnection customer user groups where we talk through this kind of thing. But I don't think it's something that, I don't view it as being within the scope of a policy initiative.
Are you going to be providing redacted? I thought the redacted report thing was more for cluster 14. Are you planning to do that going forward for all of the clusters?
I believe, but I'll turn to Jeff and Vinay.
Sorry, I didn't get that question. What was the question? Sorry.
The question was the redacted. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. I was going to say the redacted reports that you provided for cluster 14. Are you planning to continue that process going into cluster 15 and later projects or later clusters?
That's my understanding. Yeah.
Okay. It would be a good idea, and the reason that we made the proposal we did, it would be a good idea to have a more concrete idea of, instead of, well, just wait around and it'll show up sometime, to kind of have a better idea of when that might be. And when might, people see, because people can plan their activities to know, well, okay, I'm going to get preliminary, POI information in March. And so they, they'll gear their activities to be able to drop that in and use that information when it comes, instead of sort of waiting around to see what might happen. And is it coming in March? Is it coming in May? Is it coming in June? Is it, it would just be good to have a little more concrete process and clarification there.
Yeah, we'll look into that. There's, as you're aware, there's a lot of requirements, that we already need to meet. So we'll have to see what would be the best time for us to be able to provide that.
Yes, and then if you could tell everybody, that is what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. So we will go back and look into what would be the best time and let you know.
Okay, we'll make comments here also, but people are looking to cluster 16 now and making their plans. They've got site, with the site control requirements and all that. There's a lot more that has to be done to enter the queue, and so people do need that glide time to get to where it needs to be.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a lot of things on our side to do as well, like heat map and other things that we already committed to provide. So we'll have to put all that together and see when we can provide this.
Okay, and just let us know. That's what that's the request here. So we understand you have things to do, and there's a lot to do, and there's a lot of work that goes into these things, which we really appreciate. We just want to know when we might expect to see them.
We hear you, Susan.
Okay, appreciate it. Thanks, Danielle and Naya.
Thanks, Susan. We have no other hands in queue.
Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, we also had one, if not a few, comments on the scoping document for IKE 5.0, asking us to consider some changes to either interconnection milestones or timelines or the TPD allocation process to align with any potential for near-term procurement. At this time, we are, I think I want to start by saying we are always committed to trying to get this process to align with procurement. And that's a big part of why it is full of so many different milestone decisions and elements in the intake process and the TPD allocation process that it is right now. Maybe overly prescribed to align with procurement, but hopefully not to the point of it being flawed. So we are very committed to incorporating that linkage anywhere possible. At this point, we have not seen cause to change our TPD affidavit process or deadlines or our allocation process, but we do understand that there is some urgency, I think, as always, but maybe heightened urgency right now around procurement discussions and decisions, and we are awaiting any further developments from any of the LRAs, and we'll consider making any changes that are reasonable and can support that interaction with procurement. But at this time, we haven't really seen, there's been no trigger, I guess, for lack of a better word, that would cause us to make any changes to our process. So we are kind of keeping this as an open item in IPE 5, and we'll continue to discuss and explore it. But at this point in time, we're not proposing any changes in the tariff, nor are we proposing any changes to just kind of the regular milestones that are described in market notices or BPMs. I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
There are no questions, thank you.
Thanks. We'll go to the next slide then. And I think this ties back to some of the previous discussions that we had too, but there were some additional stakeholder requests for clarifications, and we're addressing those kind of outside of the scope of the policy initiative and separate notices and discussions with stakeholders. Next slide, please. Okay, getting through the agenda, we have a couple of items that ISO staff identified and make some proposals on. So we'll go to the next one, and I will be probably turning it over to, I believe this is, who is this? Whoever's on deck for the affected system piece. Go ahead and jump in.
Good morning, everyone. This is Linda Wright.
Thanks, Linda. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So FERC Order 2023 made changes to the ISO as an affected system study process. And based on the experience gained in implementing this process over the past year, some proposals have been made. The ISO and PTOs proposed to reorder the process steps outlined in KK 14.5 to create a more effective and workable process. For example, currently a determination of the need for a study, estimated timing and cost, as well as execution of the study agreement come before any technical data is received. So basically, it's just a reordering of the steps that were provided in KK 14.5. In KK 14.5.3, it speaks to the assignment of the queue position of an affected system project. It states that affected system projects with an executed study agreement will be higher queued than a regular study cluster that has not yet received its cluster study report, and lower queued than any cluster that has already received its cluster study report. A concern was voiced by Edison regarding possible adverse impacts to an ongoing ISO cluster study, base case development, and handling of potential shared general RNUs. So the ISO is proposing to keep the current staging of affected system studies requirements of processing affected system customer interconnection requests outside of the cluster application window and customer engagement window. And finally, the tariff states the affected system study will consist of a power flow, stability, and short circuit analysis. The ISO is proposing to clarify in the tariff that the affected system study will only include those reliability studies deemed necessary by the ISO and the PTO based on the proposed interconnection, which will quicken the process where possible. Any questions?
And we have a hand from Susan, and then we have Nuria after that. Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. It looked to me like there were sort of three changes. One of them was that the time frame for the study under FERC Order 2023 wouldn't start until the request was validated. So it seemed like there was some unclarity because things were taking a long time to validate, and that you didn't want the studies 100, I forgot what the time was, but that you wanted it to start after the request was validated and not have the validation process take up a lot of the study or the allocated time. So that was one of the changes, right?
Correct. Yes, I just
Okay.
gave one example. They're just all the requirements are still there. We're just ordering them a little differently so that it makes more sense. Because we don't want the validation process to cut into the up to 150 calendar days we have to complete the study.
Okay, and then so that's one change. Another change, I'm taking these out of order a little on purpose, but is the third bullet here, which says if you don't need to do certain kinds of studies, then you don't need to have them in there. So that totally makes sense. Okay, the first bullet here, this is the one that I think was a little bit weird, where it apparently FERC says it should be sequenced for with any clusters that hadn't already been completed, but the question was if you already had one in process, well, that wouldn't necessarily make sense. You might have to change the cluster study in process because they were supposed to be sequenced in priority there. So when you say keep it outside of the cluster, the whole cluster study process, which I think is the way it was written up, what does that mean, and how will you sequence these things? What does go into the base case for these studies?
So, like right now, it just says that if a study agreement for an effective system study has been executed, and the current cluster has not received its cluster study, that it would be queued above that. And so that was
right. Yeah.
the concern voiced.
Yeah, so if you're going to keep it separate from that, you're not going to put it above that, because if it was above that, that would imply that the affected system study would have to be in the base case for the cluster study, and would have already possibly started the cluster study. So I mean, I can see where that's an issue, and that's hard. But what actually are you proposing to change that at all, or what would you do based on what FERC has said to do?
Right now, they're proposing to keep it currently as FERC proposed it.
So you're going to still put it in a higher priority than the cluster study ongoing, but how will you do that if you have not already, if you had defined the base case without that affected system or that project? So what will you do if you've already got the cluster study in progress, and now an affected system study comes in that's supposed to be and you haven't finished the cluster study? So this affected system project comes in that's supposed to be sequenced ahead of what's already in study. What are you going to do with that? How are you going to put it ahead of the study that's already in progress?
That's a really good question, Susan, that I don't have the answer for.
I mean, I thought you identified a legitimate concern. It really was a good concern, but I didn't see what you were proposing. That you said, well, we're just going to leave it or do something. Anyway, it didn't seem like you did a good job of identifying a problem, but didn't really address it.
Susan, this is Bob. Let me just jump in a bit. We had some ideas, and when we weighed it against the FERC Order 2023, some of the issues that we were proposing, FERC had rejected. And so we kind of had to back off of actually going as far as we were originally planning to go, because we felt, okay, FERC has already not only ordered on this in their discussion of the issue, they said they did not agree with that change. So at this point, I think we'd like to see some comments from everybody, and possibly give us enough ammunition where we feel like we would feel comfortable actually suggesting something that FERC has already explicitly made a statement that they don't agree with.
Okay. Okay, all right. Well, I guess we'll think about it, and I mean, it seems like the only logical thing is to put them after the cluster study, or if it's an independent, you used to have something called independent study where it isn't really impacted by the cluster study. Well, that then it's a moot point, But okay, well, all right. Thank you for that clarification, because I saw that they're like, of the three things you identified, which were really good things, you fixed two of them, but this one seemed a little more nebulous. So I guess it is nebulous, and we'll try and help. Okay, thanks.
Susan, there are no other hands in queue. Back to you, Linda.
Oh, that was the end. So if there are no other questions, you can go to the next slide.
Perfect, thank you.
And this is Bob, I'll take it the next, like, 3 slides. So this item is to modify the commercial readiness deposit due date. The way that the FERC order is written is that the commercial readiness deposits are due by the close of the cluster window. Within cluster 15, it was somewhat of a transition cluster. We had some wiggle room to, even though it was somewhat stated that way, to actually say, no, let's put it off until after or at the end of the customer engagement window. So moving forward into cluster 16, we don't have that ability to do that. The requirement is that the commercial readiness deposit is due at the close of the window. And it's one of the requirements for a project to be complete. So without a complete commercial readiness deposit, the project would not move forward. So this is a bit of an issue to think about from the standpoint of, FERC put it that way in order to kind of raise the bar for interconnection requests, to make sure that we're getting interconnection requests that really are willing to put some money at risk through the commercial readiness deposit. But a commercial readiness deposit is keeping the ability to do, a letter of credit mechanism rather than just cash. That takes time. And we feel the way that it worked out with cluster 15, that it would just be a very difficult thing to do within a 15-day cluster window. And we think it's probably the better option is to actually move it to the end of the engagement window. So that's what we're proposing, is to make it a requirement to be completed by the end of the customer engagement window. The second bullet here is kind of talking about, someone had brought up, well, what if someone wants to post it early? Under the customer engagement window for cluster 16 and forward, it's 90 days. And part of that time is going to be taken up with scoring and that type of process. Our original thinking was, we really don't want to validate projects until we know they're truly moving forward. We don't want to spend time spinning our wheels, validating projects that end up not having a high enough score to be moving forward. The same thing is true for the commercial validation. There's no reason to necessarily want to go through the process of having someone do the commercial readiness deposit if they don't score high enough to move forward. So that kind of shortens the window to allow this process to take place. So one of the options is, well, maybe we can allow someone to do it sooner than at the point that they move into the validation process. So we'd like to get some comments from customers and from stakeholders. Is this something they feel would actually help the process to allow projects to actually begin that process of working with the PTOs to set up their commercial readiness deposit sooner than later? And along with that, we would like to get some comment from the PTOs related to that process, because they're kind of in that mode of saying, well, we just soon not do this unless we know they're truly moving forward. Why take on work for projects that ultimately aren't moving forward? So we're looking for comments from stakeholders on that. So I'll open it to questions.
There are no questions in the queue.
Okay, let's move to the next slide. This item is really somewhat unrelated, other than we've had this FERC required pre-application process where a project 20 megawatts and less could come to the ISO, give us $300 and get a pre-application report. And our history with that is typically projects come to us that are much larger than 20 megawatts, wanting this pre-application report. We say, sorry, you're not eligible. They come back with a 20 megawatt project and we give it to them. And quite often it's customers that are kind of new in the process and they ask for it at the wrong time. And we know that when we give them the report, by the time the next cluster comes around, that information is really not going to be something that's usable. And so we haven't seen this process work in a way that truly helps customers. It actually, in some cases, I think hinders customers from making the right decision. And now with our current process, the way we put out information, we give much more information than we would give in this pre-op report. The pre-op report is based on someone seeking a particular point of interconnection, where now we give information to say, okay, look at all the POIs that are available and don't just consider one, consider others as well, based on available capacity and so forth. So we really think it's time to do away with this pre-application report and just work with people that are wanting information and help them through the process if they're new at it to find the information that they're really seeking and give them more than the pre-application report would actually give them. So I'll stop there and open it up for questions.
Okay, Bob, there's a question in the chat from David Corzelius on PG&E. Will the commercial readiness deposit still be considered a requirement of the application before the project application is deemed complete and a queue number is assigned?
The queue number is a separate issue, but the answer is no. We would remove it from the completion requirements for an interconnection request so that projects would have until the end of the customer engagement window to finalize whatever credit mechanism they're using to provide that deposit.
Thank you. There's no other hands or questions in queue.
Okay, let's move to the next slide. So this is another one that's kind of not necessarily related to the recent changes, so forth. We've got this process where a customer could go into the executives to the dispute resolution process. It's typically for customers that have been withdrawn and are wanting to dispute the fact that they've been withdrawn. And the process is laid out that certain VPs within the ISO must respond within 5 business days. And the issue has been, well, what if that specific VP is on vacation and he's out of the office for 2 weeks? Well, we are no longer in tariff, or we violated our tariff because we're not responding on a timely basis. So it's something that we've known about and decided, based on the fact that we actually had a dispute that we were dealing with this year, that it came up again. We said, let's go ahead and change it. So it's a pretty straightforward process change that we're just allowing the VPs that are typically on the hook to make decisions and respond within 5 days to actually delegate that responsibility to another VP while they're gone. Any questions on that?
Yes, we have a hand from Susan Schneider. Susan, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, it does make sense not to delay the timing here, I think. I mean, I haven't talked to people too much about this, but it seems not to make sense to not delay the timing if somebody's unavailable. But I do wonder if it gets, the whole idea of having these specific VPs named is that they would be the ones that would actually be knowledgeable, I think, in the areas that could be covered under the dispute. So some other random VP may not actually be knowledgeable. And maybe it might be that someone who's, say, authorized to sign for the VP while the VP is gone might be the individual that would be, it could be a direct report, for example. I don't know. So we're still going to be talking about this a little, but you know, I'm not sure it makes sense to just have another vice president or just have a direct report, and of course you couldn't want it to be the direct report who already had made a decision on that particular thing. So it would have, you know, you'd have to think about it a little. Anyway, I wanted to let you know we're giving some thought to this and maybe thinking about who else, whether this is, the problem is definitely a real problem, whether this is exactly the right solution or maybe it should be opened up a little bit more potentially.
Okay, well, we're looking forward for your comments. You know, an alternative would be to not have the process be so quick, requiring an answer within 5 days. You know, that would be another alternative to where the VP that is the most knowledgeable VP would be back from whatever they're away from and be able to deal with this.
Yeah, I mean, it also makes a difference.
To speak about that a little bit more, though, is, you know, that's not necessarily ideal if, you know, sometimes you get into a situation where a project's withdrawn and we need to go through this dispute resolution very quickly because the studies have started.
Yes,
and we don't want to get past a point where, okay, it's too late, the studies are started, they're too far down the road, and there's no way to reinsert this project back in. So it needs to be a quick process. So it's kind of a, you know, 6 of one, half a dozen another. What's the best way to really deal with this?
Yeah, I think I agree, and I agree. It is more critical to have that at the beginning of the study process or during the study process, so that you don't withdraw the project and then you can't put it back in. But maybe like later in the process where it's you know, has to do with, you've already signed the GIA and it has a dispute over, you know, something else, you know, a posting deadline or something like that. So that might actually be something where you just put everything on hold for 3 weeks instead of 1 week, and maybe that would be okay. So we'll give some thought to that as well. I think that's a very good point.
Okay, thank you.
There are no other hands in queue.
Okay, next slide, and I'm not sure who on Jason's team is going to take this one up.
Hey, this is Ryan Cox on the Q management team. I'll take this one. So as everybody knows, we have a very large volume of projects in the queue, both currently and on the horizon, and we don't expect that to diminish anytime in the near future. So we know that more projects in the queue leads to longer lead times, higher costs, and generally it can just clog up some of the finite resources that all the different teams have. So we floated some ideas in the past, but we're really interested in hearing some of the thoughts that stakeholders might have of different ways that we can try to kind of have some level of accountability and some final line for some of these projects that are lingering and don't really seem to be moving forward. So again, we're just really interested in hearing some of the stakeholder thoughts and ideas that you guys might have. Does anybody have anything that they're ready and willing to propose at this time, or we can also wait for comments?
Aaron, there's no hands currently in queue. Oh, we have a new queue. Put in them.
Yeah, go ahead.
You might have a second mute on. Me too. Go ahead. Can you try again now?
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, hi. My name is Nritya Guru. I'm from PG&E. I don't have an exact proposal right now, but I do have some comments from PG&E. PG&E really appreciates the success CAISO has achieved tightening up the criteria for cluster 15 and reducing the volume of speculative projects in the queue. And we feel that I5 should extend this discipline to projects from cluster 15 and before through enforceable timing queue limits. We did have this proposal in iTrack 2 and was wondering why this isn't being enforced. I don't want to repeat again why it's important for all these projects stagnating in the queue to move away. I think that was already covered. But without enforceable limits, speculative projects that are lingering have no incentive to proceed with the project execution or make any additional financial postings. So we feel that it's important to reduce the backlog of these speculative projects so that viable projects can accelerate and come online more quickly. This is with another topic, but we also wanted to know if CAISO can share the project contact information for the projects that would help LSEs for conducting procurement. Thanks.
Thank you, Nritya. I think I can speak a little bit to the items that have been developed in the past. I know for previous IPTRAC, we had proposed some ideas that had made it to the board, but I think, and we've discussed this previously, but in further kind of looking into how we would actually implement those policies, we realized that the implementation would be difficult and overly burdensome, and that the actual improvements it would make would be not really worth the squeeze. So that was why those items didn't move forward. And to the second item you commented, I think, feel free to include that in your comments. I don't have anything to add on that.
Okay, sure. When you say that Kaiso looked into this and there wasn't sufficient benefit to it, could maybe Kaiso elaborate more, not necessarily now, but in a future paper, as to how this determination was made, like how many projects this would affect, and what were the issues holding back from implementing this proposal?
Yeah, we'll take that back and discuss it internally and get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rita. There are no other questions. Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. All right, we're going to move on to next steps. So, our proposal that was posted last week that we just discussed, and the comments on this are going to be due by end of day, August 25th. And then we are targeting a draft final proposal for October 13th with a call and comments due on that. And then a final proposal posting mid-December, another meeting and comments due in January, and we are targeting the March Board of Governors meeting for the decisional item. Then we also have an announcement that you can follow this link here for the market notice for the generator interconnection affidavits for allocating and retaining transmission plan deliverability. And that's due on August 29th. And there's a lot of information in that market notice, and all the links and all the contact information is also listed there. Okay, and as I just mentioned, end of day, August 25th, we look forward to receiving your comments through the comments template on the webpage. If you have any questions, you can email ISO Stakeholder Affairs. I've also linked the initiative page there. And in an effort to help you stay engaged with the various ISO initiatives, here's a list of key events occurring this week. You could follow any of the links here. And then just as our usual plug for the Energy Matters log, the latest log from a couple of weeks ago was the Kaiso use of AI pilot projects to enhance how operators coordinate and review planned maintenance requests for grid assets. You can always subscribe to the newsletter there below. And on behalf of ISO Stakeholder Affairs, I want to thank Danielle, Bob, Eric, Linda, and Ryan for the presentation. Thank you, everybody that asked questions and that was engaged. Thank you, Tegan, for your support as event producer. And in a few business days, we're going to post this recording to the IKE 5.0 initiative page on the Stakeholder Center. Thank you for joining us. Tegan, you can close out the call.